I once read a poem in college called Crossing the Swamp by a woman named Mary Oliver. I think her name was. I remembered it opening with the lines, "Here is the endless thick, wet cosmos, the center of everything." At the time when I first read it, I spent so much time trying to interpret the poem metaphorically that I practiced ignored the literal aspect of it. I never actually took the time just to sit back and imagine myself in the literal shoes of the narrator. I never actually pondered on what it would look like to be wade endlessly through a literal swamp, surrounded by a large endless bog. For here it is forever, for infinite mass of plasmagoric cypress trees, beckoning me with their drooping bug-infested Spanish moss, long snake-like yet oddly snakeless vines, grabbing me simultaneously to pull me out of knee-deep water and push me under, where my waterlogged fuzzy carcass could be absorbed by the trees, oversaturated with hot, sticky amber sap, pulled down further by the pronos and the mud that I must walk through, pulled down into a mirror. And even though I've conquered a mirror, I don't think I can conquer this one, because sometimes it's literal things that defeat you. I hear a twig snap, and turn to see a fleeting figure flickering through the trees. At first I am frightened, but then I tell myself that it was probably just a deer, even though I haven't seen a single animal yet, besides the gnats and mosquitoes. So instead of allowing myself to be frightened by it, I decided to carry onward, to focus on getting out of this swamp and treat to the mysterious cuts in my abdomen whose origins escape me. In fact, I don't even remember how we got here in the first place. But one thing at a time. Right now I need to focus on getting out alive before I bleed to death. I trudged on for a few moments before I heard another twig snap behind me. As I turn towards it, I see another elusive figure, and another twig snaps, then another, and yet another. Soon I'm surrounded by snapping twigs and fleeting figures racing around me in dizzying swirl, and no matter how quickly I swivel my head, I cannot reach a decent glimpse of the figures. They get faster and faster, creating a blurred whirlwind around me, and the snapping of the twigs is rising into a cacophonous uproar, accompanied by the wailing sobs from the figures, getting louder and louder and louder and louder until silence. Complete and utter silence. Everything is still. No water stirs, no breeze blows, and no twig snaps. To my left, a cluster of reeds rustle, thrusting up an explosion of gnats, and I see a shape of a person walking towards me through the reeds. I hold my breath, scared that it might be someone dangerous, someone who suspiciously did something to hurt me recently, though I don't know who. But the person who comes stumbling out of the reeds isn't the stranger who escapes my memory. No, it was a person who I remember very well, and very loved much, but who has changed horribly beyond belief. The person who stands before me is my nephew, the nephew who I raised as if he were my own, the nephew that I love with all my heart, the nephew who broke my heart, the nephew who had died more than 2 years ago. Auntie? He gurgles hoarsely through a mouthful of thick amber sap tree that dribbles down his chin. We stare in shock at each other, him taking my muddied and bodied appearance, and I taking his dusty brown shriveled skin, his lipless mouth, his soiled shut and skeletal frame, and his empty eye sockets that ooze putrescent black liquid. "Is it really you?" he asked, voice taut and cracked from death. I slowly nod my head and combined in mute horror and refreshed heartbreak. He shriveled his head and shakes only sadly as his gnarled bony fingers unbuttoned the now dirty suit that he was buried in. The white button down his shirt stained with black and red, and he only pulls back the shirt. Black-red fluid squirts out of the bullet hole in his abdomen. The fluid that is horrifying mixture of liquid rot and fresh blood, trickling down his legs and tainting his water around him. "Why do you show me this?" I whispered tearfully, easily heard this strangely silent swamp. "I know what happened to you. I know what that man did to you." "Don't blame him," he moans, spitting out the tree sap from his mouth, and he talks. "Don't blame him." "But he shot you and left you to die," I said, slowly shaking out my hand in disbelief, not much at his words, but at the presence itself. At this his head suddenly snaps off his neck, and his hands catched it before it fell into the sickly water. "Don't blame him," he repeats, sap oozing out of his opening where his neck used to be attached. "Please, please, don't blame him. Him, God knows, I don't." "How could I not blame him?" I sobbed. "He took away the closest thing I had to a son, and because of him, I had to watch, powerless, as you slip further and further away." "No," he answers. "I was there the whole time. The only thing slipping away was my humanity." "No, don't say that. You weren't there. You were unresponsive. You were in a coma because you hit your head in the concrete." "I was there, Auntie. I heard your sobs. I heard your stories. And I felt your tears on my arm. But I couldn't do anything except lay there in silence." "No!" I wail, splashing onto my knees. "Don't say such things. Don't torment me this way. You're not even real. You're not even here. You're dead. You're just a hallucination." "If you insist." My decomposed nephew sighs sadly, crumpling on himself and collapsing onto the significant water. "No!" I screamed, running over to where he stood, ignoring the pain in my abdomen. "No, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I take it back. Just please don't leave me again. Don't leave. I miss you. I need you. Please come back. I'm begging you." I crouched over to feel his remains in the water, but collapsed from the pain and dizziness. I painfully dragged myself out and crawled towards a sap-soaked tree and curled up against the stickly trunk, bawling like a little girl who had just lost everything all over again. Eventually, after I stopped crying, I reapplied the mud all over my wound to slow down the bleeding, though I thought that guarantees an infection. I could feel the hot sap clinging onto my shirt as the mud slowly pulls me down into the swamp, down into my past, back when I first heard my sister and her husband had been shot in a break-in, back when I took my orphan 6-year-old nephew after nobody else would take him in. The mud dragged me through all the years and I had spent raising him. Years that until a few minutes ago, I managed to put it behind me and was back in my apartment on that cold, lonely January night more into 2.5 years ago, when I got the call from the hospital saying that they had my nephew, that he had been shot and hit his head on the concrete, and that he was unresponsive. After I arrived at the emergency room, the doctor explained further that my nephew didn't have any identification to him, and all the information they had on him was from a nearby store clerk who occasionally talked to him. They suspected he was in an unresponsive coma, but it wasn't until they ran some tests and they were able to confirm this. At first, I visited him as often as I could. I talked to him, I fed him, I held him, even though he made no signs of improvement. I always get the distinct feeling that somehow, someway my nephew was still in there, listening to me and crying silently for help, but there was nothing that I could do except try to face the fact that my nephew was gone. And soon after about 2 months, I stopped visiting as often in hopes of being able to accept my nephew's situation. Then in June that year, I finally gave the doctors permission to pull the plug, as people say. After that, I fell into a deeper depression than I already had been. At the time, I thought that I made the right decision, but after he died, I became smothered in a stifling blanket of heart-wrenching guilt and self-hatred. All I could think about night and day was whether or not I did the right thing for my nephew. And then a little over a year later, I finally made the decision not to beat myself up anymore, and tried to forgive myself and move on from the experience. 7 months later, I left Nashville and moved up here in New Orleans. in hopes of finally leaving that part of family in my life behind. And I did for the most part. I got a job in an apartment, and I started therapy. Eventually, I managed to get myself to a point where I felt happy in it again. Except now, 6 months after the move to New Orleans, this godforsaken swamp is trying to drag me back down again. And so far it seems that I've been working. I get up weak-limbed and lightheaded, and started trudging away through the dirty bog water and giant clouds of gnats and mosquitoes once more, being careful not to use my abdominal muscles as little as possible. To distract myself from the pain and dizziness, I turn my focus instead, trying to remember how it was when I got there in the first place. But the truth escapes me, and so instead, I try to read what the weather will hold. I look up in surprise to see that the sky had gone quickly from bright, sweltering summer blue to foreboding dark gray. I slipped on some mud at the bottom of the stagnant water and fell into the stump of broken tree branch, which jabbed me smartly in the shoulder. As I pull up my torn and soggy sleeve to see if I broke the skin, I felt the first fat droplets of the rain smack against my head. Soon I followed the heavy downpour around me, and then over the sound of screaming water and pattering leaves, I realized something. I realized that I can remember how I got here. There was a bad thunderstorm last night, with rain and heavy so hard it was hard to see, and thunder was so loud it shook the buildings. I had been in an Egyptian-themed tea shop called the Nile's Rest when the thunder had been the worst. After it moved away a bit, I left, hurrying home, desperate to get out of the torrential downfall. It was then I snatched violently into an alley. I tried to fight back. I tried to scream for help, but they were too strong, and my screams were muffled by the rain and the strange-smelling rag that the person had over my face. After a few minutes of struggling with the rag over my face, I couldn't move. It was hard to think, but I remained conscious as my kidnapper, who appeared to be a woman in black, wearing a plastic dust mask, gagged and tied me up. She then dumped me into the trunk of the car and drove, my bones knocking together at the joints the whole time. I tried to take note of it and left and right turns, but there was way too many to keep track of. The drive seemed to last for hours, until eventually I passed out from the intense humid heat within a small trunk. Eventually I found myself being awoken by my kidnapper on the road in the middle of the swamp, presumably this one. She dragged me out of the trunk and stood me up and cut my ties and gag. I tried to run, but in my disoriented state, I didn't make it very far before I slipped onto the slick mud. The masked woman caught up with me and held me down, laughing manically as I tried to push her off. She then jumped abruptly off of me, and I tried to run. But after a few moments, she caught me by the shoulder, whipped me around and stabbed me repeatedly in the stomach, laughing insanely the whole time. I collapsed from the pain, and the woman hit me over the head with a rock, knocking me out. That was what I think of this morning. I woke up half buried in the mud and in the middle of the swamp, my eyes stinging from the brightest morning sun, glaring at me through the break-in over the foliage. I dug myself out of the mud, muscles stiff, head pounding, and abdomen throbbing. I lifted my shirt to see that the wounds from the knife had been somewhat clogged by the mud. However, they were still bleeding pretty heavily despite this, so I applied some of the more mud, and started making my way through this bloated bog, surrounded by the silence and an odd absence of animal life. Exhausted and miserable, I now continue onward, hoping that some slim chance I chose the right direction to walk the way and could find my way out of this swamp before it kills me. The rain and the pools of stagnant water won't allow the mud to dry, so I constantly have to stop and reapply more of this fat, greasy mud, becoming more and more outtrenched by the emotions of my past. With every glistening paint stroke, I can't get the vision out of my dead nephew out of my head. He was all my everything, and I had to think I may have cut his life short when he could have gotten better is too much for me to handle. I loved my nephew like a mother would for her own son, and that was when that was taken from me by some stranger who wanted to take his money. Yet my nephew just told me not to blame the man who shot him, But how can I not blame him? He took away the only family I had and I was still close to, and I can't ever get it back. Not only that, but I had to watch the person I love the most in the world, someone who had natural rights, should have outlived me, lie unresponsive in coma. But now he says that he was there the whole time, listening and thinking and feeling, but powerless to do anything about it, and now that means I ended his life for no reason. That he was conscious the whole time, and the doctors were wrong that I ultimately killed my nephew. If I can't forgive the man who shot him, then how could I possibly now forgive myself? But I must move on, though I am exhausted, dizzy, and pain. I must keep going. I must get out of this nightmare swamp while I still can. Only then I can figure out what to do with my life when I've done. But I am weak and thirsty, but I know I can't drink the water here. Feeling increasingly more dizzy and my breathing became significantly more rapid within the last minute or two. I gently lift off my shirt to see all that mud had been washed away, and that blood was pouring out like a Nile river. Vaguely I know that I must cover with mud. To mend myself is Iris mend Iris's, and that I must gather mud like Sobek, the crocodile god, gather Iris's body. I bent down to scoop it, and my head cycled the moon around my body. But the world swirls around me, and I am sent crawling into the ground, face to up the cosmos beyond. I am not sure where I am exactly, whether in Cario or Giza, or even somewhere else, but I don't know the seasonal moonstones soon to be shining, spinning around me, and that heavy water stains my face. I close my eyes to a world or wait for the season to end, but for whatever comes next. Auntie, is that you? I opened up my weary mug-soaked eyes, and was unprecedented sight I find, that the rain has gone, and the wind is now sighs, while his throat a man begins. Auntie, my nephew beckons, now restored, come with us and be together once more. I look down to see my love, my heart now mirrored, standing right next to Sobek from Nile Bor, god of healing, to heal my broken heart, blessings of Aris, and a fresh new start. Up I stand, and firm as the ground I feel, the water dried by Sobek holy grace. The rain goes on, but there is a rain set seal. There around there are so many taint not our place, and our beloved dear holds out his hand, and so I take it joyfully in place, towards whatever it comes from swift sand. My nephew smiles at my saddened face, and our saddened hearts Sobek breaths, and he makes the swamp a place of leaves.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.